a lot of people text me questions. I don't know if we can finish them. If we cannot, then we have to beg you again to schedule another time. But here with me, I have one question we can start with, and then I see Godfrey Alphonsus is a student pastor from Nigeria. We also have questions, and some of them are texting me. They are about to join. So the question number one here says, what are the best way of taking care of our mental health?
It might be a good idea to first describe what is mental health, or even what is health. Basically, health is a well-balanced whole person. Okay, and there's many things that are involved in that. The way I like to look at things is and I think I mentioned this before, a biopsychosocial and spiritual model. And my computer's acting up here, so I'm not sure. I've got the diagram here. It should be on a whiteboard, but I'm not sure if you can see that there. A biopsychosocial model. Those are, and spiritual. There's a lot of overlap there. The biological, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual. And finding good balance in there, finding that balance will get you where you want. And if you look at that diagram, you can see a star right in the middle. And that's the balancing point. When everything's in balance there, that's when you have health, you have physical health, and you have mental health. And so, okay, well, somehow it got on here now. But anyways, looking at that biopsychosocial model, if you look at the biological aspect of that, you think of physical fitness, exercise, sleep. Those are all things that can help you have biological health, that help you with that. And then there's things that can detract from that: slothfulness, illness, disability. And then there's psychological health, being able to take a rest, possibly vacation, education, knowledge, and then psychologically, there are things that can distract you from health. And think of things like guilt, drug use, escapism, having the wrong worldview, entitlement, victimhood, ingratitude, defeatism. Those, and I think we talked about that before. That's called nihilism. Social health, friends and family, help, and then things that can detract from your social health would be things like promiscuity, trauma and violence, pornography. And if you have poor family and friend structures, if you don't have friends, if the friends that you have are not reliable friends, these are all things that can detract from you socially. And then if you look at this model again here, but I put spiritual at the very top there. And spiritual health, things that get you on course are your relationship, peace with God, things that can detract from you spiritually, ungodly music, getting into occultism, and things like demonic influence. And if you notice that I put the spiritual at the top, because the spiritual aspect kind of is the guiding principle over all these other influences. If you have good spiritual health, it'll affect your biological health. You'll be a good steward of your body. Psychologically, you'll avoid the influence of bad friends, and socially, you'll strive to have good family relationships. So there's a lot of uh, there's most influence would be the spiritual aspect of that. Matthew 11:28 and 30 says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest into your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So a biblical or a spiritual worldview will determine how we approach all the other aspects, the bio, psycho, and social. So how that gives us a good idea of what health is. And I believe your question was basically, how can we help with that? Is that the main question that you have, Joshua? Just getting all of those things in balance and working towards getting balance in all of those things. There's I think one of the questions that was posed to me here recently is, is there medicine for things like depression? Can we fix all these things with a pill? And there's some pervasive knowledge going around that depression and mental problems are just a chemical imbalance. We've heard of that very frequently. And there is some truth to that, but what causes this chemical imbalance? Is it because of the things and decisions and choices that we make? I think that's very heavily influenced. Now, there are some things that are familial, things that kind of run in families, and there may be some influence in this. But I think it's important not to get into a victim mentality that these are things that happen to me, instead of thinking about things that I can do to improve my mental and physical health. So that's kind of the big debate these days. Is this mostly is it nature or is it nurture? And I think we're finding out that there's combinations of both things. There's some people are more predisposed to certain things, but mental things, but there's a lot that we can do to help that.
Thank you so very much. Pastor Godfrey Alphonsus, he's here. Let's ask one of his questions, and then I will go ahead. I have questions here.
So, good evening. Thank you for this privilege. My question. What are the common causes of mental disorder? So you made explanations about mental health and all of those. So what are the common causes? I think you started mentioning some of them earlier.
Okay, yeah. Again, some of the common causes, first of all, I think certain people are predisposed to certain things. If you think about a very nervous person, Pastor, and maybe that can sometimes run in families. So there's a predisposition towards those things. Some of these things can kind of allow the other bio, psycho, and social factors and spiritual factors to spin out of control. And so losing balance, say someone's very nervous, sometimes they won't have a good friend and family structure to support them if they become overly nervous. And if they lose that pillar, or that, if you can think of like a stool that has 4 legs in it, if one of the legs become loose, then that put stress on the other legs of the stool. And before you know it, the whole stool will come tumbling down. So as a pastor, it's good to help shore up those things and ensure that the bio, psycho, and social aspects as well as, of course, the spiritual, which is the most important part, are shored up. So ensuring having that family support, being physically active. Some people become very reclusive, and encouraging them to get out and foster some of those family relationships, getting exercise, um, uh, uh, getting knowledge, reading, getting in the Word. These are all, you have to look at it as a whole person thing. Medically speaking, if you come to see a medical doctor, they're going to give you a pill because you see the doctor for 15 minutes. There's not a lot a doctor can do in 15 minutes. And medicine is helpful in that it helps clarify your mind, maybe. It gives you a temporary reprieve to address those other three legs in the stool. But I think I would look at that as more of a temporizing thing, even though some people will end up being on medicines for a long period of time. But I wouldn't see that as what we call a silver bullet that's going to try and fix the situation and slay this monster that's plaguing a lot of people.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the other question is, so we deal with people as pastors. We have a lot of people around them. So what do you look out for? What are the things? What are the signs? What are the things that you will see to identify like symptoms? So what are the symptoms you would see to know that this person is liable or has a tendency or somehow is mentally ill? What are the things you will see? What are the signs?
Well, I can give you if there's a manual out there, it's called the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, and it's in its 5th version right now. It's called the DSM-5. It gives you different criteria for all these different things, and it's a book that's hundreds and hundreds of pages long. But we can address some of the common things like, say, depression. There's a couple easy tools that a pastor can use. And I had another handout here, and it was this. It's called See, Gasp, Die. It's a mnemonic, and use the first letter of each of those here to help you figure it out. And I'm going to go over some of those things. Okay, so some of the things in this mnemonic that you can use, if you memorize the see, gasp, seeing things, gasping as in trying to get air, and then die as in deceasing. So C is concentration difficulties or indecisiveness. If someone is just, their mind is not focused, if they're not able to decide things where they normally would, that's the C. Gasp. G is for guilt, feelings of worthlessness, defeatism, that sort of things. Appetite, if they're losing weight. S in gasp is sleep disturbance. If they're not able to sleep, they're only getting 3-4 hours of sleep a night. P is psychomotor retardation or agitation. So psychologically, if they're becoming more agitated, or on the other end of the spectrum, if they're becoming very, very flat in how they're interacting with people, they're kind of looking through you, not at you. That's the gasp. The die, D-I-E. D is for death or suicide. If they become suicidal, obviously that's going to be pointing towards things like depression. Interest. Maybe they had a lot of interest doing different hobbies and different things, going for walks, but now they don't want to do that anymore. So they've lost interest in a lot of things. And then E is, again, energy loss. They just don't have energy to do anything. They just want to sit around staring off, and that would be an extreme measure, but just not wanting to do anything anymore. So those are things that would be helpful to look at. And that's pretty useful mnemonic, that see, gasp, die.
Thank you so very much. In regard to this, we have a similar questions. Pastors also deal with a lot of things, and sometimes we try to ask them to see, to find help from psychiatrists, or they are doctors, but they will say they are not mad people. Why would they visit a psychic doctor? So is it true that everybody that visits a psychic doctor is a mad person, or is it is there a way we can also convince them to see a psychic doctor? And please, could you close the whiteboard? I think we don't need them right now. We don't need it.
So seeing a psychiatrist. Yeah, I guess there's the I think we mentioned before this this idea of competent to counsel. It's written by Jay Adams. It's a very interesting book on how pastors and even lay people can help with counseling. I think in America we've kind of gotten into a trend where we refer in the church out to the professionals, and those professionals have a role. If you're counseling someone and you're coming to a standstill, you're not making any progress, I would look at a counselor, either a psychiatrist, which in America, a psychiatrist is a doctor that deals with psychiatric problems, but they also prescribe medicine, and a psychologist, which is someone that helps others deal with problems. And just through behavioral therapy and counseling and that sort of thing. And there's definitely a role for the psychiatrist in prescribing medicine, as I mentioned before, as a way for people to help get some clarity in their minds to help them address those other problems that we spoke of. And so I wouldn't, I think that the pitfall is that there's a tendency to just channel these people towards the psychiatrists and counselors, but not address the other underlying problems, the psycho and social problems. But someone that does see a psychiatrist for temporary help, let me back up a little bit and say that there's a difference in worldview of what is causing mental illness. And this goes way back into the 1800s with Sigmund Freud and some of the early psychiatrists. They viewed mental illness as caused by mainly things like guilt. And there's two ways you can address the problem of guilt. One way of addressing the problem of guilt is by saying guilt is bad, so let's get rid of guilt. And the way you get rid of guilt is by getting rid of the idea of sin. So things like homosexuality, things like drug use, and these kinds of things. If you look in the modern psychological and psychiatric communities, they're going to do the things that they'll counsel towards is reducing guilt by getting rid of the idea of sin. If they're in their minds, if there's no such thing as sin, then there's no such thing as guilt. Guilt goes away. And that's how you relieve people of this feeling of sin, of guilt. And if you get rid of the guilt, then mental health will improve. The problem with that is that mental illnesses have not gotten better, they've gotten worse. I think from a Christian psychologist's and viewpoint, the way to get rid of guilt is to repent and to improve relationships with God and with man. So there's a fundamental difference there's a fundamental difference of how you approach things like guilt. So as a pastor, if you send someone to a psychologist that is and has a very humanist viewpoint, and a humanist is someone that turns to humans to help solve the problem, then I'm not sure that that's going to solve your problem. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it might not. So the church needs to continue being involved. There is a role, however, with medicine, and again, I see it as a bridging, a time that a person can use to help think better to address some of those other problems. So I think the question, and I've kind of been beating around the bush. The question was, when I see a psychiatrist, does that mean I'm going mad?
Does that make me a mad person? Because
does that make me mad? Does that make me crazy if I'm seeing a psychiatrist? Yes. Is there shame? I think that the real question is there shame in seeing a psychiatrist?
Yes.
And I think everyone has a breaking point. And people may have a higher threshold for their breaking point or a lower threshold. And if you're seeing a psychiatrist to help you get through these things, I don't think there's any shame in that. There would be, I think it would be very tragic, though, if people are sent to some of these people with a different worldview. In other words, if they're convinced that they're a victim of this idea of guilt, instead of addressing the underlying problems that cause the guilt, that I think would be tragic. And so I think if you, as a pastors, counsel these people that seeing the psychiatrist is basically going to give them a little bit of time to think a little bit clearer, so that together you and the person from your congregation can address these underlying problems, then I think that would be a better way to address these things, rather than just saying, I mean, nobody is crazy for going to see a psychiatrist, and there shouldn't be anything shameful in that, as long as I think the church stays involved.